Welcome back, my friends. If I got an important one for you today, the Gktech 240SX/Skyline high misalignment outer tie rod ends. And enter the classic box shimmy, as well as the post shimmy product shot here. Here's what you get inside. Some protective dust boots, which are optional as these hives are PTFE lined. 3 sets of extenders for your pleasure. The longer ones as shown here. You'll also get medium and the shorties that are attached to the tie rod end itself. These come in both M12 and M14 to suit all inner tie rods, so keep that little nug of knowledge in your mind. If you were running the Gktech inners, you will be using the M14. The tie rod assembly itself includes the knuckle shank, nuts, shims, and that short extender from earlier. This tie rod end will give you up to 64 degrees of misalignment to cover all suspension setups, high and low. It comes standard with adjustment shims to get rid of any unsightly and embarrassing bump steer by changing the height of the rose joint, which we'll explain here in a few. Moving right along to the part all men need to know about, the extenders. The longest extension in the kit is 95mm, the medium-sized one is 76mm end to end, and the little short boy comes up at a whopping 57mm end to end. That's called options, son. You're welcome. You will want to choose the extender that gives you the maximum amount of thread engagement possible, but let's talk more on that later. Moving swiftly along to the meat and potatoes, aka the install. Oh my goodness, look how unsafe, haggard, and sad that OEM outer is looking. Let's change that, shall we? Start by loosening up the lock nut and loosen that guy right up. Now remove the split pin, then zap the top nut off. Give her a little love tappy, and remove that hunk of garbage from your life permanent style. Install the new Gktech shank to the knuckle so the taper is fully seated, give it a push up to keep it from spinning, then zap the nut down. Once zapped, torque to the conveniently located specs on the screen. It's science time, my friends. You want your rose joint to sit parallel to your ball joint. This is why said shank is super ultra long and has adjustment shims, so that you can adjust the height of your rose joint to suit your setup. Doing so can reduce bump steer as expertly demoed by this fella. 1 second you're happy and loving life, then next a bump, then some bump steer, ending in a bad day all around. Sick initiation though. Anywho, to make sure you have the maximum thread engagement, as you can see here, the shortest extender works with the wheels facing forward, so we're going to go ahead and use this size. Thread the entire tie rod assembly down onto the inner and make sure you have that max engagement. Let's move on to science part 2, adjustment. Let's say you're running a certain knuckle and you need the rose joint to be as low as possible to be in line with the ball joint. You'd stack all the flat shims on the top, then the tapered one at the bottom, then another tapered one, then the nut. You always want the tapered shims on either side of the rose joint regardless of setup. If you were to say have a set of knuckles that required the rose joint to go way up high but not quite all the way, toss on one larger shim, a tapered one, then the hive. You'd stack the rest on the bottom, then the nut. In our particular case, we want it to go all the way up, so we'll use one tapered up top. If you are JDM tight and you're running tiny wheels, you can cut the shank down to the length you need to clear and run just the tapered shim and the nut. However, we want to keep our options open and we'll be tossing all the shims back on. Now tighten and torque the nut to these specs right here and move along. Time to toss a wrench on the extender and another on the inner and outer locking nuts to get those snug. Time to head out and get a proper alignment that isn't done with your highly tuned and calibrated ocular units. Before you get the alignment dialed in, make sure the bearing is not cocked to the left or right and it is not running out of alignment up or down on compression or droop, but is running central and has room to be free as shown here. This is Johnny Caps and I live in that V8 dream, but only one of us has a Bluetooth supercharger. To find out who, go sub to both. Keep in mind this is a guide only. If you can't install these, have a pro do it, and for Pete's sake, reach out with any questions you do have. This has been Officer Dan, Johnny Caps, and Zach B isn't brave with another Gktech how-to. Peace.